What's up, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Rocky Hollow Horror Show podcast. I am your host, Cujo, and I would like to thank you for joining me, and I hope that life is treating you well wherever you may be. I'd like to start by asking you a few questions. When was the last time that you went to a drug-fueled sex orgy in the chicken coop at your favorite gay friend's house? Hey, for you, that might be a little bit out there, but for a person like me, it's a weekly thing. But you know what they say, different strokes for different folks. Or what about this? When was the last time that you huffed some varnish and paint thinner out of a bag and then listened to someone serenade you with a live harp performance? More than likely, you have no experience with either one of these scenarios, but if you do, hit me up. I'm just joking. On this episode, we're going to discuss a very dark moment that happened in the middle of nowhere in Georgia. Yeah, we have Satanist lovers, murder, plenty of sex and drugs. So I cannot stress this enough when I say to you to sit back, strap in. You are about to hear the story of Corpsewood Manor. So Corpsewood Manor, as weird as it sounds, that place has a special place in my heart. It was one of the first famous crime scenes that I ever became aware of in my life, and I owe that to my older brother. See, my older brother and his friends, they used to go and get drunk, and they would go riding around, especially on the gravel roads down here in North Georgia. And I remember the day that he showed me a brick, and he said he got it from a place that he called Devil Worship Mountain. He went on to tell me this crazy-ass story that I now know is not even halfway near being the true story of what happened at Corpsewood. But most of the small-town, hillbilly-ass people had come up with all kinds of crazy stories about that place. I mean, it's located in the Bible Belt, and you can already imagine what type of rumors would be created about a place like that, especially in the 70s and 80s, hell, even up into the 90s. My brother said that if you took a brick from the manor, you would be cursed by a demon until you returned it to the site, which at the time when I was a kid was enough to scare the hell out of me. But as an adult, we all know that's just a bunch of bullshit. So let me tell you what really happened at Corpsewood Manor. So Charles Scudder was born on October 6th, 1926 in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. In the 1940s, he attended Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio, and he was involved with the school's drama program. There is where he met a young lady named Helen Kilborn Hazlett, and the two were married on September 10th, 1946, but the marriage didn't last long. It soon ended in a divorce. In the 1950s, Scudder met a new girl and he remarried. Her name was Bortai Bunting. What a name, Bortai Bunting. And she was the daughter of British modernist poet Basil Bunting, who I have never even heard of. And that marriage also ended in divorce, but only after the couple had 4 sons together. Scudder was a student of Chicago's Loyola University, and he studied under Dr. Alexander Karczmar. That's also another hard name to say, Karczmar, Karczmar. And he was a neuroscientist who was a professor and chairman of the Department of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics at Loyola, and director of the Institute for Mind, Drugs, and Behavior. After graduating, Scudder became associate director of the Institute for Mind, Drugs, and Behavior and worked as an associate professor. Years later, Karczmar would describe his student, friend, and colleague as being quite eccentric. Scudder kept a pet monkey and he dyed his hair all kinds of odd colors. Scudder was really a pioneer for what you see on modern college campuses today, purple and blue hair, and back then that really stood out and brought him negative attention, unlike today when it's more socially acceptable to have colored hair and piercings and tattoos, or to even identify as a dog or a goldfish You know the type of people I'm talking about. He was also an accomplished harp player and had been invited to play with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra at one point. Scudder also owned a mansion on West Adams Street in Chicago, which he filled with lots of beautiful vintage furniture which he had acquired from a liquidation sale from a local theater. In 1959, he hired Joseph Odom, who went by Joey, as pretty much a live-in maid to help with the kids, but the two were developing feelings for each other behind the scenes, and the two continued living together in the mansion well into the 1970s when Scudder's children were adults. The now doctor was growing tired of university politics. He had a bunch of medical students who were growing more unruly and less interested in learning what he was teaching. Scudder longed for an escape from taxes, light bills, gas bills, water bills, heating bills, and the helpless feeling that resulted from watching his old neighborhood disintegrate into an urban ghetto. Scudder loved his gardens, and he enjoyed the frequent visits from the city's animals. His partner, Joseph Odom, had always enjoyed the simpler life, and he had an inherent dislike for anything that was modern. After some conversations, the couple decided to move out to the country where they could enjoy the seasons of the year without having to deal with harsh winters. Somewhere isolated where they could live off the grid. So for months, the couple studied geological maps of southern states, and they contacted a lot of local realtors. Scudder finally found a plot of land on the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains that was surrounded by national forest land. There was no running water, no phone or electricity available, and the only way to the property was via a long, winding dirt logging road. And while he was still lecturing at Loyola University in Chicago, he bought the land, had a well dug, planned his house, and bought a small camper and a Jeep. In 1976, on his 50th birthday, Scudder resigned from his position at Loyola University. He auctioned off all of his furniture and possessions that he didn't care about, gave away all of his electrical appliances. He sold his home in Chicago and arranged for a moving company to handle all the things that he decided to keep. Scudder and Odom, along with their 2 English Mastiffs, left for a little town in North Georgia called Tryon, in the midst of a terrible blizzard. They lost their way several times in the course of the trip, and when they did finally get there, they couldn't locate where their property was. They were lost and stranded in the wilderness. They made a camp and waited out the blizzard. When the storm finally cleared, they found the rotting, maggot-infested corpse of a dead horse along the old logging road, so they appropriately named it Dead Horse Road. Dr. Scudder and Joseph Odom took in the beauty of the bare, haunting trees around them, and they named their new home Corpsewood. You know, I do remember the first time that I ever rode down Dead Horse Road heading up toward Corpsewood. I was with a friend of mine at the time, and we were riding in his little Cavalier, and I do remember as I was looking out into the woods how creepy that place was. There wasn't a leaf in sight that wasn't on the ground. All the trees were totally bare, and I remember seeing one of the biggest timber rattlesnakes that I ever seen in my entire life out there on Dead Horse Road. So now, while living in a camper on the property, Scudder and Odom set out on building their castle in the country, as Scudder would later describe it in an article he wrote in 1981 for Mother Earth News. During the construction of the house, 45,000 bricks were laid by hand. These were 3 layers thick with a 2-inch wide airspace between for insulation. They dug trenches and installed pipes for sinks, a tile drainage system, and a chemical toilet, which was later enclosed in a brick outhouse. By the end of the summer, the pair were able to move into the first floor, which contained the kitchen, dining room, and living room. The next year, they put a roof over the 2 upstairs bedrooms, which were reached by a circular stairwell that was illuminated by stained glass. Along with the 2-story house, they had also built several outbuildings, including a 3-story chicken coop. The first floor of the coop was for live chickens and food storage. The second floor was for canned goods and the couple's massive pornography collection. The top floor was nicknamed the Pink Room, or the Pleasure Chamber, and it was furnished with mattresses, pink linens, pink carpet, and pink painted walls. And this is where the couple would entertain their guests. What's up, everybody? It's your favorite podcast host, Cujo, and I would just like to take a moment to say thank you to all the people who take time out of their life to listen to this show. This is just a small project that I work on in my free time, and there is no long-term expectation that this podcast will grow into anything popular. But the more people who listen, the closer I will come to being able to run advertisements on this channel, which will help me bring you new and fresh content. So if you like what you hear, share with a friend, or if you're listening on Spotify, give me a 5-star rating. Thanks. When Scudder left his position at Loyola, he took a few souvenirs with him, including 2 human skulls, about 12,000 doses of government-grade LSD, and a pink gargoyle. Scudder's gay relationship was far from the only secret that he had been keeping. He was also an official member of the Church of Satan. And being the eccentric that he was, he named his 2 dogs Beelzebub after a demon and Arsanath after an H.P. Lovecraft character. He decorated Corpsewood and satanic artifacts and other occult items, such as a stained glass window he made himself, which depicted Baphomet, a prominent symbol in Satanism. You know, the goat creature with wings. And the human skulls. He placed a gargoyle on the front of the manor. And Scudder was also a huge fan of the Addams Family, and he had a sign placed out front that said, "Beware of the Thing," of which the small town people would speculate that the Thing was a demon they summoned to help the dogs guard the property. He also drove around with a pentagram painted on the side of his Jeep, which really turned some heads in Chattooga County, Georgia. But despite this, Scudder never identified as Satanist, and instead, he was an atheist who related to the beliefs of Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan. As practiced by the Church of Satan, they do not worship a deity, but instead they worship themselves. The devil is used kind of as a symbol of humanity's inner desires. A few months before their impending murders, Scudder had painted a self-portrait. He was bound with duct tape over his mouth, with what looked like 5 bullet holes in his head, which many can speculate was a premonition of his own death. Now, Joey Odom was an exceptional chef. This guy loved to cook. He would prepare meals while Scudder would serve as host, and Scudder would often play his golden harp for guests. Candy Grogan, a Tryon local, was called one of Scudder's closest friends by the Chicago Tribune. She described a candlelit dinner party at Corpsewood Manor that featured a 5-course meal complete with wine served in silver goblets. She said in a quote to the paper that it was a fantasy. The 2 men liked to invite guests over to the Pink Room for wild sex parties, which had now been outfitted with whips and chains. There was even a logbook there where guests were required to sign in and list their sexual predilections. And just by the way, fun fact, that book disappeared later during investigations, which led and still leads a lot of people to this day to believe that local figures that were probably pretty important were probably frequenting this sweaty sex lodge. Though Scudder did not partake in using drugs, he did provide guests with copious amounts of LSD. Scudder did like to drink, so he made a lot of homemade wine. Friends would even bring him fruits, and Scudder would make them wine, and he would even name it after them. As stories from the Pink Room emerged, rumors about the gay devil worshippers hosting sex parties at their mountainside castle billowed through the deeply conservative community of Tryon. And it wouldn't be long until the wrong people found out. It was in 1982 when a 17-year-old named Avery Brock wandered onto the Corpsewood property. Brock was an avid hunter from nearby Walker County, and he requested permission to hunt the man's land. Brock had lived a pretty hard life already, His father had kicked him out of his home at a young age, so Scudder happily granted him permission to hunt on the land. And over time, Brock became friends with the two men, and he even joined them in the pink room for sexual activities. Other accounts claim that Brock had merely gotten permission from Scudder and Odom to hunt on the property, and after befriending them on their sprawling estate, came to believe that they were much wealthier than they really were. So later on into 1982, Avery Brock had moved into a trailer home with a 30-year-old friend named Samuel Tony West, and that's when he told West about, quote, the queer devil worshippers who he believed were hoarding a fortune in their home. That's when the pair sat down and they hatched a plan to rob the couple in the future. On the night of December 12th, 1982, West and Brock were out riding around, and that's when they decided to go pick up Tony West's nephew, Joey Wells, and his date, Teresa Hudgens. They were out cruising the back roads, indulging in drugs and alcohol. That's when West probably said to Brock, "We should go pay a visit to our good friends on the mountain." And on their way out to Corpsewood Manor, they picked up a .22 caliber rifle from Brock's mother, and they told her that they were going out to hunt some rabbits. And then the four began winding their way up Mountain View Road en route to Corpsewood Manor. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by Scudder, and they all climbed up the ladder into the pink room, where they sat around drinking Scudder and Odom's homemade wine and huffing a potent mixture of alcohol, varnish, and paint thinner called Toodaloo, while Odom was in the main house cleaning up after supper. At some point during the drug-fueled haze, Brock got down to business, and he said that he was going out to his truck to get some more Toodaloo, when in fact, he went to fetch the rifle. It's important to note at this point that Wells and Hudgens had no knowledge of West and Brock's plan. He returned and immediately pointed the gun at Scudder, and upon seeing the gun, Scudder, probably a little intoxicated from all the drinking, giggled and said, "Bang, bang." Everybody laughed out loud and sat back down and started using drugs and alcohol again. But after about 20 minutes, he built his nerve back up, and he and West held Scudder at knife point and ordered him to give up the location of his money. Wells and Hudgens were terrified, and they ran down to their car, but the engine would not start. Brock went down and into the main house's kitchen, where he surprised Odom, shooting him 4 times, as well as killing the couple's 2 mastiffs. Bound and gagged, Scudder was taken into the manor, where he was met with the body of his dead partner. Brock led Scudder into the library, pulled down the gag from his mouth, and set him in a chair. Scudder stood up and shuffled toward Odom's body. West ordered him to stop, but Scudder continued on. That's when he uttered his last words, "I asked for this." West shot him in the head at close range, dropping Scudder to his knees. Another shot sent Scudder reeling into a bookcase before he was shot 3 more times in the head. Brock and West began their siege, ransacking the house and desperately searching for a hoard of cash. They found none. They grabbed several items of little value and threw them inside of Scudder's Jeep. They hauled Scudder's golden harp out to the vehicle as well, though they didn't take it along because they realized that it wouldn't fit. The 4 of them left the crime scene and went back to the trailer, where West threatened to kill the 2 teenagers if they told anybody about the murders. The bodies of Charles Scudder and Joseph Odom would not be found until 2 days later, when their friend Raymond Williams visited Corpsewood to notify the couple of the passing of a friend in Rome, Georgia. After noticing bullet holes in the kitchen door, he went down the mountain and called the sheriff's office. That same day, Teresa Hudgens came forward to the police, and a nationwide manhunt ensued. The two had been planning to flee to Mexico. Brock and West drove Scudder's Jeep through the night, eventually pulling into a dimly lit rest area outside of Vicksburg, Mississippi, where they decided to switch Scudder's Jeep for something more nondescript, because it only had huge pentagrams painted on the door. They noticed Kirby Key Phelps, a 26-year-old Navy lieutenant who had graduated from Georgia Tech just a few years earlier, sleeping behind the wheel of a Toyota. They forced Phelps out of his car, led him into a grove of trees. When Phelps tried to escape, West shot and killed him. God, man, I can only imagine being in the car with these two knuckle-dragging hillbillies. I can only imagine the type of shit that was coming out of their mouth. I bet they were freaking the fuck out after they realized what they had done. Idiots. So while in Austin, Texas, the two men argued about their plan, and then they split up. Brock voluntarily surrendered to police in Marietta, Georgia on December 20th, and West was arrested in Chattanooga, Tennessee on Christmas Day. During the trial, the defense accused Dr. Scudder of spiking the wine with LSD in order to try to have oral sex with the men. The bottle of wine was tested by law enforcement, and it tested negative for LSD and any other hallucinogens. When that failed, West argued that he was involuntarily intoxicated. The defense went as far as to say that on the matter of supposed drugging, he had a motive because he was a homosexual. Prosecutors pointed to the fact that West had confessed to a Georgia Bureau of Investigation's agent that he and Brock had planned the robbery and murders just a few days prior. West also told a GBI agent that Brock wanted to kill Scudder because Scudder had once engaged in oral sex with him. During his confession, West also said, "All I can say is that they were devils, and I killed them, and that's how I feel about it." Scudder's old colleague and friend, Dr. Corpsewood, was also contacted during the trial and attested that Dr. Scudder was not a drug abuser, and he was not a devil worshiper, and he was actually the type of person who would disapprove of drug usage. While the brutal murders of Scudder and Odom were deemed justifiable in the eyes of the public, because of satanic panic back in the 80s, but the murder of Kirby Phelps was not. Kenneth Avery Brock pled guilty and received 3 consecutive life sentences. West was convicted of double homicide and sentenced to death, but not having the right number of women on the jury led to a retrial. In the second trial, West was resentenced to life in prison. Brock is currently serving his life sentence at the Coffee Correctional Facility, while West is currently serving his life sentence at Wilcox State Prison. Both have been denied parole multiple times. A small private funeral was held at Corpsewood, where Odom's ashes were scattered in the rose garden. Dr. Scudder's ashes were taken back to Wisconsin by his sister Janet Scudder Arnold, where they were buried in the family plot. Famed defense attorney Bobby Lee Cook of Summerville, Georgia, was hired by Scudder's sons to represent their claim to the estate. Odom's sister also claimed the estate, as Scudder's will had left everything to Odom. Scudder's gold-encrusted harp and bronze statue of Mephistopheles from Corpsewood Manor are currently in the possession of Bobby Lee Cook's family, as he has recently passed away. The bloody tragedy at Corpsewood Manor in 1982 has since become something of a satanic, sex-fueled myth. But could it be that perhaps prejudice against the victim's sexual orientation and religious beliefs were really the center of it all? Thanks for listening, everybody.